it's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel, or for those of you who are watching for the first time, welcome to my channel. On this channel, I create videos about the college and graduate school application processes so that you guys know everything you need to know about getting into the colleges of your dreams. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about college interviews. Now, this can be a topic that's pretty scary for some people, but I hope after this video, you guys will feel very prepared to embark on your college interview journeys. So let me start by kind of explaining a little bit more about how college interviews work. There are two types of college interviews. There are on-campus interviews and there are alumni interviews. It's important to know that all colleges handle interviews differently. Some schools don't offer any interviews at all. Some schools will offer an optional campus interview or an optional alumni interview, and some schools actually require an interview in order to gain acceptance to that school. And so it's really important for you to check the admissions page of the schools you're applying to and see how each one of them handles the interview part of the application. Now, let's say you've done your research on the schools you want to go to, and you find that some of them have optional interviews. Those schools may give you an option to sign up for an on-campus interview or for an alumni interview. I strongly encourage that you sign up for those interviews if and only if you feel that you have a very good interviewing presence that can positively contribute to your application. Let's say you're someone who's really outgoing, you love chatting with people, and you have a warm and friendly persona. You should absolutely try to get one of those interviews because it's going to do nothing but highlight the positive parts of your application. However, do note that those interview slots will fill up pretty quickly. On-campus and alumni interviews are pretty wanted by a lot of applicants, and so don't wait until a week before the application is due and think you'll just get an interview. In fact, you should be trying to sign up for those interviews as soon as you know that that's a school you might want to go to increase your chances of actually getting one of those slots. But let's say instead you're not an outgoing person. Maybe you're pretty shy and you'd rather talk to no one than an interviewer. That is totally fine too, but I just caution you against signing up for those different interview slots because if you don't feel that you're going to be able to bring a positive and optimistic and outgoing personality to the interview, it might end up doing more harm than good. And so, don't feel like you have to take those optional interview slots. Only do so if you really think that interviewing is going to help your chances of getting into that college or university. But unfortunately, even if you're not very outgoing and the thought of an interview mortifies you, some schools, and especially top-tier schools, might require that you interview. A place like Harvard, for example, will not accept applicants unless they have first been interviewed by someone on campus or by an alumni of the school. And so I'm now going to give some tips and tricks for how to actually approach the interview process, whether you're someone who is eager to do an optional interview or you're someone who kind of has to do the required interviews, whether or not you actually want to. My first suggestion is practice. This is true whether you think you will ace your interview or whether you are terrified of having an interview. I've seen too many students who are really comfortable talking to others completely freeze up during the day of their interview because these interviews are pretty high stakes. If you're interviewing at a school that you've dreamed of going to from the time you were little, it can be pretty intimidating just to start talking to this person who might have some sway over your ultimate admissions decision. And so I think the best way to sort of counteract that nervousness is to practice and prep before the actual interview day so that you go into that day as confident as possible. Tip number 2 is sort of similar, which is read over your application and any supplement essays before the day of your interview. Interviews are either open file or closed file. So essentially that means that sometimes the interviewer is able to see the things you've submitted to that college, and other times they can see nothing but maybe your name and your gender. However, whether it's an open or closed file interview, I think it's a great idea to review your application because if something comes up that you've talked about on your application, it's going to be really fresh in your head and you're going to be able to talk about that topic very convincingly and very effectively. My next tip is educate yourself on the school you're interviewing at. I can almost guarantee you that during a college interview, one of the questions will be, why do you want to come to this school? And if you don't have a very strong or convincing answer to that question, the interviewer is not going to be terribly convinced you actually want to go to that school. And so maybe you wrote a why do you want to go to the school supplement essay. If you did, just read that over, remember those reasons. And if you didn't write an essay like that for the school, go on their website and learn about things that you love about the school, maybe certain clubs that you could see yourself joining, or maybe academic programs that really excite you. Just something that you can answer that question with so that the interviewer is very confident that you want to go to that school. My next tip is prep a list of questions to ask the interviewer. Another thing almost every interview will ask at some point during the interview is, do you have any questions for me? And if you sit there and stare at a wall, or you kind of mumble and have no real questions prepared, that's not going to look very good on your part. Instead, I recommend you come up with a list of questions so that when the interviewer asks you that, you'll be ready with a list of questions. And these don't even have to be school-specific questions. In fact, I almost encourage you to do more generic questions so that you don't have to create lists every time you have a college interview. But I don't recommend you pick boring questions either. So you might want to ask things like, what was your favorite part of the school when you went, and what was your least favorite part? Or, in the time since you graduate, what would you say is the biggest change that the school has gone through? And do you think that's been a good change or bad change for students? Essentially, you just want to have some really well thought out questions that you can ask your interviewer so that you're not either pausing or staring at a wall when they inevitably ask you if you do have questions. My next tip is either videotape yourself during a mock interview or have someone actually mock interview you. And the purpose of this is primarily for either them or you to pick up on any distracting habits you have during an interview. Let's say you tap on a table and don't even realize you're tapping on a table, or let's say you talk really, really fast and don't even realize you're talking really, really fast and no one really knows what you're saying. Basically, there can be a lot of things that you do wrong during an interview that you don't even realize you're doing and that just happen because you're nervous. And so it's really good if you can pick up on those things before the day of your interview, because although no one's going to hate you as an applicant because you tap the table, nervous habits can be quite distracting for the interviewer, and you don't want anything to be taking away from what you're saying during the interview. My next tip is learn about your interviewer. If you are doing an alumni interview, what often happens is the college will give that alumni your name and contact information, and then they will reach out to you via email to schedule an interview date. The benefit of such system is that you get to find out the name of your interviewer before your actual interview day. And take advantage of that information. Go on Google and research that person. Figure out what they do for work and what sorts of things they studied in college, so that on your interview day, you A, feel a little more comfortable around that person, but B, can also kind of talk about topics that you know will be of interest to them. Because at the end of the day, if the interviewer likes you, your odds of getting into that college will certainly increase. My next tip is leave your cell phone in the car. Use it as a GPS, use it to talk to friends before your actual interview, but once you get to the location of your interview, put that cell phone in the car and don't look at it until your interview's over. I have heard horror stories of students who start their interview and then their phone rings, or worse yet, their phone just keeps vibrating during the conversation and they're so distracted by the constant vibrations on their leg. And so nothing can go wrong if you don't have a phone, but plenty of things can go wrong if you do bring a phone with you. So for that reason, I strongly recommend you leave it at home or in the car. My next suggestion is bring a copy of your resume to the interview. Now, not every interviewer is actually going to accept the resume, which is totally fine, but some of them will. And I think it's really, really helpful for them to have a copy of your resume, especially if it was a closed file interview, especially if they had no access to any parts of your application. Because when they go to do the after interview write-up where they essentially tell the college or university how your interview went, having a one page of all the stuff you've done during your high school career will be really helpful for them as they actually write that summary up. And so again, if they don't accept it, if they say no thank you, just put it back in your bag and take it home. But if you offer it to them and they do accept, I think it can be a huge asset to you as they write up their reflections from your interview. My next tip is be early. And this one might sound really dumb. Like, of course you're going to be early. Who's going to be late to an interview? But I have a lot of students who think that 5 or 10 minutes early is sufficient. That way if you hit a few red lights or if something slows them down, they'll have no issue making it on time. But 5 to 10 minutes is not enough time to allow in case something goes wrong. Let's say you get lost and you need to fill up your gas tank. Or, let's say you get really nauseous and you need to pull over on the side of the road and just take a break. No, those are weird. That's weird. Don't do that. There can be lots of unexpected things that happen, and I think only allowing about 5 to 10 minutes for those unexpected things isn't the smartest move. Instead, I encourage my students to try to get to their interview location a half hour early. If they end up having just to sit there for a half hour before their interview, fine. Use that time to read over your application or read over your supplement essays. Or just relax and listen to music, but at least there won't be an extra added level of stress because you're not sure if you're gonna make it there on time. My next suggestion is show confidence, but not arrogance. There are lots of different approaches students take to interviews. Some think that they should be really, really humble and kind of underplay all of their accomplishments. And some students think that they need to brag about every single thing they've done so that the interviewer knows how wonderful they are as applicants. And I think there's a sweet spot between those two approaches. You want to make clear to your interviewer all the things you have accomplished, but you don't want to do so in an arrogant or cocky way. And so when you start your interview and as you're going through the interview, be mindful of being proud of the things you've done. You've worked a lot of years to get to the place you're at. Make sure that you take the credit that you deserve. But at the same time, you don't want to seem so obnoxious and so arrogant that the interviewer is going to be turned off by your sort of excessive braggingness, by your excessive amount of bragging. That sounds good. Okay. My next suggestion is avoid controversial topics. Sometimes interviewers will bring up things that they really shouldn't be bringing up. During my own college interviews, I had people talk to me about the political election going on. I had people talk to me about abortion rights. And I was like, what is going on? Why are you asking me these questions? Because typically interviewers are not supposed to talk about controversial things. But some still may, and I think it's important from your end that you try to tone down things as much as possible. And even if you think you really get your interviewer and you really think you know how they would feel about a given issue, I think the far wisest decision in this case is just to avoid talking about the topics, maybe nod or give a short little answer and then try to move on as quickly as possible. Because tensions can really get fired up when talking about controversial topics, so it's really best to avoid them at all costs. My next tip is weave in anecdotes throughout your interview. Sometimes interviewers will ask questions that make it really easy for you to tell a story. They'll be like, what's something that happened in your childhood that influenced the rest of your life? Obviously you're going to use an anecdote because they're essentially asking for an anecdote. But sometimes their questions might be a little less specific about a story that has happened to you. Maybe they're asking, why do you want to study this, and this in college? Try your best to weave in as many things about you as you can while answering the questions that they ask you. Maybe you want to study science in college. Talk about the time when you were 10 and you went to the science museum for the first time and completely fell in love. Or maybe talk about a research project you've been doing during high school that is focused on biology and how that has really spurred your interest in studying biology in college. And so don't just answer the question without pulling in different parts of yourself, because if you do that, you're really missing a good opportunity to show them who you really are. And then my last and final tip actually has to do with after the interview is over. And that is write your interviewers a thank you letter. This can be a handwritten note that you mail to them, or this can honestly even be an email that you send to them. But I think writing some sort of thank you letter really shows your appreciation for the time that they took to actually interview and talk to you. It can never hurt to show appreciation, and so I think it's a really nice way to end the interview process on the most positive note possible. And those are my interview tips. I hope they were helpful. I hope now you feel a little bit less nervous about the college interview. And I know that if you guys follow those tips and really take them to heart, you'll do very well during your interview days. If you have any questions about the college interview process, things maybe I talked about or even didn't talk about, please either send me an email, my email's in the description box, or comment on this video and I'll get back to you guys as quickly as possible. If you learned anything at all from this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more tips and tricks about the college application process. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.